Welcome everybody to this afternoon's Spotlight Lecture. This lecture is actually being recorded as well, so you can enjoy it again at a future date, especially if you didn't catch some of the finer points. My name is Neil Borbell. I am the Public and Armor Program Coordinator here for the Worcester Art Museum, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's final Spotlight talk of the season. Our Spotlight series is sponsored by the Bernard G. and Louise B. Pallets Fund. Today, Jeffrey Forgeng will present a preview of the Arms and Armor galleries. Jeffrey Forgeng has curated the John Woodman Higgins collection since 1999, first as the Paul S. Morgan Curator at the Higgins Army Museum, and since 2014 as the Higgins Curator of Arms and Armor and Medieval Art here at the Worcester Art Museum. His responsibilities at WAM entail integrating the Higgins collection of some 2,000 arms and armor objects throughout the museum. This includes the reinstallation of the medieval galleries in 2016, the addition of numerous armors in contextually related galleries in 2017, and the planning of the permanent Arms and Armor galleries, which is estimated to open in 2025. Jeffrey is the author of over a dozen books, most recently The Medieval Art of Swordsmanship, Royal Armoury's Manuscript 133. He holds a PhD in Medieval Studies from the University of Toronto. Please help me welcome Jeffrey Forgeng to the podium.
Thanks, Neil, and thank you all of you for being here. I am absolutely thrilled to be here today, and in a number of ways. I feel deeply privileged and fortunate to have been the curator for this collection for all these years. It's really been a very rewarding experience. A very rough ride at times, but eminently worth it. And I wouldn't trade it for worlds. So I'm delighted to be here for that reason. I'm delighted to be here too, because there's nothing I love more about my job than sharing the Higgins collection with the public. And I'm delighted to share a bit about it with you today. And finally, I am delighted to be here today because I can actually we're at the point of the project where I can really tell you what's going on. We know what the gallery is going to look like. We're still, populating it with specific content and experiences and so on. But the shape of the gallery has really come together at last. It's been a lot of work to get us to this place. It's been very, very rewarding to have done this work, very exhausting at times. And it's really a year and a half at this point till completion, the blink of an eye in museum time. I'd like to take the story from a sort of a broad perspective, to really to tell the story kind of from the beginning, because in a lot of ways, in order to understand what we're doing with the gallery, it helps to have a sense of the broad arc of the story of the Higgins collection. And I also want to tell that story because, oddly enough, I have told the story of the Higgins collection to many, many audiences around this country. I have never once told it in Worcester. Ironic, right? But that's kind of where I would really like to begin today. And of course, with this, that begins with this charming little whippersnapper. John Woodman Higgins was the son of a Worcester industrialist. His dad set him up in 1905 when they went in together to get the Worcester Press Steel Company founded, established in the Greendale section of Worcester, where the Higgins Armory would ultimately be constructed. And the buildings, it may be a different iteration of the buildings, but those buildings are essentially still here today over in Greendale. The Worcester Press Steel Factory specialized in stamping plate steel into various sorts of shapes, using these tremendously powerful machines. And I can see that at least some of you in the audience have already picked up that there's not just business as usual going on the shop floor in this photo, probably from the 40s or so. Higgins grew up with sort of boyhood passion for the stories of knights in shining armor. That was sort of part of his makeup too, and he kind of integrated it in some ways into his business from the very outset. When time came to choose a business logo, a knight in shining armor was what John Woodman Higgins went for. But the connection really went to a deeper level during the course of World War I. As the war progresses, the U.S. Army, although the U.S. is still not in the war, as of 1916, they see the very real possibility that the U.S. will get dragged in. And they can see that this is not a war like anything that the U.S. Army has ever experienced before. The Army is not prepared for it, definitely not prepared for trench warfare, needs equipment. Above all, soldiers in the trenches need helmets to protect them from the heavy artillery kinds of bombardments that are a major part of trench warfare. But nobody in America really knows anything about helmets. They haven't been worn in the U.S. really since the 1600s. So the Army turns to Bashford Dean, perhaps the only person in the country who could really claim to be an expert on the subject. He was the curator of arms and armor of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And so they commission him into the Army, and Dean starts this project to reinvent the helmet for the U.S. Army in the 20th century. And so Dean knows a lot about historical helmets and kind of different possible designs, has a lot to work with. But what he doesn't know about is industry. These helmets need to be not just effective on the battlefield, they have to be producible at scale at a reasonable cost. And so he's going to have to bring in people who know something about what it takes to produce these kinds of steel products. And that's where John Woodman Higgins comes in. He's an industry consultant on the project. This helmet is actually one of my favorite objects in the Higgins collection. It's visually, I think, a really kind of compelling object, plus all the stories that are embedded in it. The product of a collaboration between John Woodman Higgins and Bashford Dean. It's Dean's design. It's executed at the Higgins, at the press steel factory as a sort of it's a prototype for a possible helmet design. So Higgins is involved in this project during the war, but the connection kind of goes dormant for a few years after the war is over. Things really pick up again starting in 1926. In the summer of that year, Higgins and his family are touring Europe, and Higgins starts buying arms and armor objects from various suppliers in France and Britain. I'm reasonably certain that by this time he's already thinking of founding a museum, partly because he's buying these objects and partly because at the very beginning of the following year, he commissions a design for this building from the Leland Architects firm in Boston. So you can see here the building, the garage across the street, the sort of proof of concept that gets constructed first, still there. It's been covered up. You can't really see its original features, but it was part of that same project. So by 1927, we know for certain Higgins was planning to create a museum on the grounds of his press steel factory. I mention this in particular because there's sort of an old folk tale that circulated in Higgins circles for many, many years that Higgins was buying all kinds of armor, and eventually he had to found a museum because his wife was sick of tripping over the stuff around the house. And it is true that Arms and Armor did find its way into the Higgins street, home on William Street, but it was just waiting there until the museum. It was a temporary arrangement while the museum was kind of in the making. And so he continues to collect in 1927, 1928, in the lead up to the creation of the museum itself. 1928 is a really important year because this is when Higgins' collection goes from just being kind of an ordinary sort of arms and armor collection with a few decent objects to something that's really of national importance. These 7 suits and 2 helmets that Higgins acquires from Sir Joseph de Devine really catapult him to the next level in terms of the quality of his collection. Several of the most important objects in the Higgins collection today date to that January 1928 purchase. So he's continuing to acquire for the museum, as ground is broken in 1929. The museum is under construction for the next couple of years and opens in 1931. And in this early photo, you'll see the configuration of the Higgins as Worcesterites of, say, of my generation or earlier. I never saw it. I wasn't a Worcesterite back then. But this is sort of what people my age and older will remember of the museum. Two wings, the ancient wing, dominated above all by the 100 steel knights that Higgins amassed, and then the modern wing. This was a museum not really just of arms and armor at the time, but a museum of metalcraft. Higgins particularly prized armor as sort of an apex of metalworking craft, but he also wanted to show the broader history of metalworking across time. At the time the museum opened, it was still kind of sparse. If you see some of the photos, and to some degree you can see it here a little bit, Higgins is still struggling to kind of fill up the scale of his great hall. And so he's still acquiring pretty actively up until the early 1930s. It drops off by about 1934. He's still making some important acquisitions after this time. Objects from the Mackey collection acquired in the late 30s and early 40s are among the most important of this group, kind of ranking with Duveen as crucial points in the building of Higgins' collection as a national level collection. Even in the 50s, some noteworthy pieces. This is one of these sweet spot objects. What curators love and what visitors love is not always the same thing. But this is something that both parties can totally agree on. It's an amazing object from a curatorial point of view, but you don't need to know anything about arms and armor to really fall in love with this object. And it's finally back in Worcester after a multi-year tour around the country as part of the Age of Armor exhibition. It's here again. I'm thrilled to have it around and thrilled to know that it's going to be on display before too terribly long. So by the time Norman Rockwell creates his cover for the Saturday Evening Post, the Higgins Armory collection, as we know it, has pretty much taken shape. That cover comes out in 1962. Higgins had died the year before, and it's kind of the sort of the first warning of rough years to come. In addition to the death of Higgins himself, this is a period when industry is on decline in New England, and it has its impact at Worcester Press Steel. The company is starting to fail, ultimately is sold off and closes. The armory is really struggling to deal with the situation without its main patron, without the connection to Worcester Press Steel and the sort of financial backing that used to provide. And by the late 1970s, it's been concluded already that the Higgins Armory Museum is not financially sustainable. A plan is put in place. The trustees of the Higgins approve it, but last-minute lobbying by Higgins's children scotches the deal. Basically, the Higgins's children say that for the following decade, they will make up any shortfall in the operating expenses. And that's what really convinces the corporators not to go ahead with the plan. And interestingly, it sort of heralds the beginning of an Indian summer in the life of the museum. The 80s, the 90s, and in some respects, even the early 2000s, are a time of amazing achievement at the museum. The galleries are reinstalled in the version that the kind of younger generations will best remember it, with the fabulous jousting installation in one wing. Really beautifully done reinstallation of the space. Public programming is at its most dynamic. Visitorship is really strong, and that momentum really carries even into the early 2000s. This is the period when Kent Russell was the director at the museum, and I'm really pleased that he's here today. He is indeed the person who hired me. I started in '99, kind of at the tail end of this Indian summer. It was really fabulous to have been a part of that. Also in terms of curation and scholarship, this is a time when we actually start to see publications coming out of the Higgins Armor Museum, and acquisitions begin to start again. This small sword, which you can see in the paintings galleries here, was really one of the best acquisitions made for the collection in modern times. Again, a sweet spot object that curators and visitors both can agree is really spectacular. But the storm clouds are already starting to gather again. By the early 2000s, one financial downturn after 9/11 starts to put the museum under increased strain. After Kent left the museum, we really didn't have a permanent director after that point. We did. We had a lot of instability in the leadership, and ultimately, Suzanne was brought in 2010 to do the forensics, to see where does the museum stand, and a lot of hard work on the part of her and others working with her really established that the museum is not sustainable. The reality is it's never been sustainable. And it mostly has to do with endowment. I hope I'm not giving you PTSD, Kent. But I think it's kind of, for many of you will know this already, but if all of us care about cultural institutions, it's really important to recognize that cultural institutions can't really support themselves on earned income. You need a robust endowment to carry the weight of things like stewarding a collection. Very expensive proposition that doesn't generate money. At the Higgins Armory, we had the double burden of a historic building as well. And that also is a huge financial drag. The rule of thumb is that you should be able to draw sustainably about a third of your annual budget out of the endowment. Our endowment was about a sixth the size that it would need to sustain even our very lean and mean annual budget of 1.2 million. There was not a lot of fat on that particular joint. It wasn't sustainable. We got through the 80s with family support. Basically, everything up until through the 80s was family supported. In the 90s, boom market. The endowment seemed bigger than it was, but cold water again in the early 2000s. Brought us back to reality. So in 2011, we started conversations with various partners that we might work with to find a permanent home for the collection or some kind of a new business model for the organization or stewardship of the collection. And importantly, we also started deaccessing very actively. And this is a question I'm often asked about, a topic I'm often asked about. So I really did want to talk about it a little bit here. I had always known that the Higgins the collection had a lot of objects that just didn't need to stay in the collection in the long term. Higgins had originally created a museum of metalcraft, and that wasn't the mission anymore, but we still had a lot of objects that dated back to that. He had also bought reproduction objects that were for didactic purposes, but museums are kind of more strict nowadays in terms of distinguishing between real objects that might be for a collection versus reproductions that you might use for, say, educational programming or something like that. We had things like the American Civil War saber that you see at the top right there. We had a lot of these, a lot of 19th century sabers. I have kept some in the collection, but this is never going to be a collection of 19th century militaria. There's a lot better places to go to find that sort of thing. Springfield Armory, just an hour down the road. That's really not what this collection was all about. We had duplicates and objects of lower quality. So the Jizai figurines that you see at top left here, very mediocre examples of this traditional Japanese craft of making metal figurines that articulate. If you go down into the Japanese gallery here, you'll see the ones that we kept. They are spectacular. They just didn't need to be in the collection. And then don't get me started on that helmet. I just feel like, imagine you're actually wearing this thing And like its eye slots are like this. It means you can only look straight forward. You can't look left or right because the eye, like one eye is going to go up and the other is going to go. That's just not like. And but you know, it's like a very, very obvious fake. And there were a bunch of these sorts of things. So I had started chipping away at these kinds of objects bit by bit. This was going to be a 20-year job, is kind of how I pictured it. But money was starting to run out, and I really needed to accelerate. So we basically did 20 years of deaccessioning in 2 years. It needed to get done. I'd rather I didn't have to rush it as much, but it was worth doing. It really kind of helped move the process along in the merger with WAM, because no museum really wanted to take on 4,500 objects if really only 2,000 of them were worth keeping in the museum. In 2011, Matthias Waschek was hired on. That kind of also changed the dynamic, new perspectives, new ideas. By the end of 2012, we had hammered out the framework of a deal around this. And in particular, I highlight Matthias's idea of open storage, allowing us to display essentially the entirety of the Higgins collection. This is a major deal sweetener from the point of view of the Higgins trustees, because this had never been done before. Most of our collection was downstairs in storage, off view. This would be a really major achievement, a really major legacy in favor of the Higgins collection. And it really did change people's perspectives and is, as you will see, become a crucial factor in the design of the galleries. So the Armory closes at the end of 2013, as if the Almighty needed to remind us of the importance of closing down. While we were away on New Year's Day, January 2014, the museum flooded yet again. Pipes burst, they unfroze, and we had water cascading down one of the stairwells, and this was not the first time the Higgins had flooded. There were many floods over the years. But it was a good reminder of why we really needed to move ahead with this. And so the collection moves with helmet to this location in 2014. I cannot begin to tell you the number of people that have worked on this project or the complexity of the various kinds of things that we have done, but the text and images here may give you some idea of the range of activities that we have undertaken already in order to make this as strong an outcome for the collection as we can. Been able to do some amazing things, and you will get some highlights of some of the outcomes. But I've mentioned a couple of people who've been involved in the process over the years, but I cannot begin to give credit to everybody who has contributed to making this project succeed. And so I will just ask for the forgiveness of those of you whose contributions have not been given the credit that they're worth. At the outset of this process, I pulled together this document that you see here, outlining, kind of to remind us of what we needed to do with this gallery. And I'm not going to go through all of the points here, but I'm going to highlight a couple of them. 2 and 3 kind of go together from the point of view of today. The legal covenants of the gift stipulated that a dedicated space of 4,000 square feet would be given to the collection and that it would display substantially the entire collection. So that's sort of one of the parameters that we're working within. Number 7, organizational sustainability. I spent a lot of time trying to come up with ways to ensure that whoever has to do my job in the future is going to bless my name rather than curse it. So, for example, I want the new galleries to have some versatility. They're going to be in place largely unchanged for a really long time at the broad level. So I want things to be able to be traded in and out for the storyline to work, even if somebody really wants to do a kind of a substantial reinstallation or add new acquisitions into the mix. basically I want that flexibility for whoever has to work with this gallery in the future. Also things like digital technologies. And we don't have a huge amount of capacity in this organization to support high-level complex digital technologies. They're fabulous in museums when they can be done well, but we would not be able to sustain that reliably, and I don't want to put that albatross around the neck of somebody in the future. So I've been really kind of sparing in the use of digital technologies. And then finally on this list, I think perhaps most importantly, we needed to, this project to help WAM develop its distinctive identity. This means a couple of things. For example, we can't just be a mini-Met. If we tried to do what they have in New York, it would look like the Met, only smaller, not so good, with not the same scale and quality of collection. We just can't compete with that. We can't play that game. We've got to come up with something that's going to have to be measured sort of on its own terms and not on the terms of what you see at the Met, at Chicago, at Philadelphia, at these other institutions, and particularly something like the Met, only 3 hours away, much bigger, much richer, a lot more space to work with as well. We have to do something that's going to be really different. Similarly, the old Higgins Armory, a lot of the same sorts of considerations apply. Higgins had a lot of money, and he was building it at the outset of the Great Depression. You could get a lot of work done for the kind of money he had available to him. Our budget is limited. We have to be really strategic about how we spend it. We don't have as much space either as we did at the old Armory. So we have to find other ways to get the kind of wow factor that we really want. We can't try to make this a mini Higgins Armory because, as like a mini Met, it's just going to be smaller, less good, less well funded. So this, to remind you, is the space we're working with. At top right, you'll see the old space of the library at WAM, and then on the left-hand side is sort of the back end of the L shape of the old temporary exhibition space. So the space on the right is kind of where we assume people will mostly come in from. It's sort of the main front gallery that we expect to be the chief point of access, and then the open storage area will be at back in the left. This is the view that we have created for visitors as they come in that front gallery. We're working with IKD, is the name of our design firm. And so this front gallery will derive its wow factor from as many suits as we can fit into the space, somewhat limited number possible because of the kind of footprint that they occupy, but suits of armor are what you're going to see the moment you come in. This is also the gallery that's going to feature the star objects from the collection, and it's also going to be a very atmospheric space as well. And crucially, we've decided to really emphasize a global perspective on arms and armor in this space. This is something that makes us different from any other arms and armor installation you will see in this country and by and large around the world. You go into the Met, they have that fabulous cavalcade of 16th century sort of armored figures on armored horses. Looks really wonderful, but it's all Europe at the center of the story. So we felt that this could be a really great way to approach our topic for the 21st century. You will go into the gallery, and front and center you see 3 suits of armor. On the left-hand side, 19th century Mughal India, northern India. In the center, late 19th century Sudanic armor. And then on the right, 16th century European armor. And one of the things that's really fabulous about this approach is that there's this amazing universality about the kind of heroic figure of the armored warrior that you can find across cultures, across time, and there's so much commonality in it. The way the ancient Greeks thought about the armored warrior, and thought also about what the armor meant, how they perceived the armor itself. And this is something that you can see in the world of Mughal India, in Sudanic Africa, in late medieval and early modern Europe. And in all of these cultures, these armors were expected to have a deep emotional kind of impact. I'm not going to go explore it too far, but there are connections of concepts of heroism, concepts of a sort of legend, of mythology, and also a kind of connection to a sort of semi-mythic past. You see it in all of these three suits, and you can see it in the story of armor around the world and across time. And what's especially interesting about drawing that connection across time is it connects to our responses to armor in the present. People come in, they look at these suits, and their jaws drop. There's this emotive power that these objects have, even for people nowadays in an environment when these are no longer really a living part of the material culture, but they're still deeply embedded in our cultural mythology. And you see this in how people respond to arms and armor in museums, but also the role of arms and armor in films, in video games, pop culture in various forms. It has this kind of emotive power. And that emotive power is very similar to the kind of emotive power that these objects had for the people in the day when they were actually being worn on the battlefield. A lot of the same kinds of associations at play. And so that's really the story that we're going to emphasize in this front gallery. And again, particularly apt because it is precisely because these objects are meant to communicate heroism and legend and awe and wonder that they are crafted as works of art. And so you can see in the gladiator helmet, in the Modronia helmet in the center, in that conch shell helmet on the right, the same thing going on. The skill, the artistry, the ingenuity of the craftsman transforming the wearer of the armor into this semi-legendary, into this heroic figure. This is going to take a little bit of sleight of hand because the Higgins collection is fundamentally Eurocentric. Look at the numbers here. More than half the collection comes from Europe or from the West from the late Middle Ages up until 19th century or so. Particularly 16th century European is the largest single grouping. So the front gallery will tend to overemphasize, overrepresent the non-European component in the collection, and in order to kind of give a different spin on the experience. IKD have done a fabulous job with the design of this gallery. They decided they wanted to play with the concept of the arch. That library space has the old windows from the original 1898 building of WAM. On one side, those windows still are actual windows. The other side has been blocked up because of the expansion of the WAM campus over the years. But they decided, let's kind of play with this concept of the arch, embedding it into the display cases at the back, looking at both the kind of universality of the arch as an architectural feature, as well as the kind of variations that it's had in various times and places. And also kind of embedding that into the shape of the central podium and the light fixture above it. This has to be seen in person to be believed. I've only seen like a small sample. They did a kind of proof of concept there some months ago. And so it's basically, it's kind of like a chain mail kind of sweep with that houses the lighting fixtures. And it looks fantastic. I love it in a whole bunch of ways. Mail is sort of the number one universal success story of armor. You see it across times, across cultures, from the eastern end of Eurasia to the west. It's even being worn today by butchers and shark divers and stuff like that. It's got this kind of universality to it. Also, the play of light on mail is really super cool, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the full thing installed. So they've come up with some really great ideas about how to give a lot of personality to the space. The blocked up windows on the left-hand side of the gallery as you go in are, we needed to do something to enliven them. They're big features of the space. And IKD came up with the idea of projections, and actually, it could have been their idea, it could have been my idea, I don't even remember where. That's one of the great things about a really successful development process. You sometimes lose track of whose idea it actually was. There's been a lot of really great synergy in the development. But in any case, we've selected artworks from the 2D collection, particularly from prints and drawings, to very lightly animate and project into those arches. It will add color in a space. Mine is a pretty monochromatic collection. So color is a really great thing to add to an Arms and Armor gallery. Also intrigue. What I wanted to, part of what I requested of the designers, the digital designers, would that people might do a double take, like the animation would be so light that it would take people a moment perhaps to realize that it's even happening, and they nailed it. I am not going to show you the actual slide or the movie MP4 here today, partly just because I don't trust the technology. It always fails when you try to do that kind of thing. But you'll have to come to see it in the gallery at scale. It's going to be spectacular, but they really did a wonderful job of it. You can see here 3 of our spectacular Yoshitoshi prints from 19th century Japan. Remember that these arches aren't actually going to be right next to each other. They're spread out across that wall. But you can get a sense of some of the effects that they've kind of added into it. Play of light, added sort of effects of kind of the changing light, as well as the cherry blossom petals, which actually float from one frame to the next over the course of the animation. And I am thrilled by it. Each of the animations different, has different kind of concept, different artworks and so on. But they really did it, and I just can't wait to share this with the public. So that's the front gallery. They have opened up a doorway at the back of what used to be the library, leading into the rear gallery, open storage. And this is what you'll see in this space. As you come in, I should note that we're still in the development process. That wall on the right-hand side is not actually going to say Lorem Ipsum. So there's some features, the details of what you'll see here that have yet to be kind of fully worked out. But the overall shape of the space is going to be what you see here. And the wow factor is all those objects. Some objects really lend themselves to quantity, others don't. Arms and Armor is definitely on the yes side of that ledger. It's that kind of whole baronial hall, ancestral armory kind of thing. Having these things piled up densely is really going to be a sort of jaw-dropping experience for visitors when they first come in. We will have some 900 objects or so on display in the open storage area. And this is probably my favorite rendering of all, of the ones that IKD has done. I just like, baby's first swords. That's a concept of, it's sort of an approach to parenting that I could really get behind. This is one of the areas in which we've built modularity into the plans. So the shelves will move or are movable. There's these sort of sliding mesh panels as well that kind of add capacity for more objects to be on display, but also they can be moved around so the displays can be tinkered with over time. So that's kind of one example of that adaptability that I've tried to build into the design. Because it's open storage and the objects are packed really quite tightly, we have to rely heavily on digital technologies to get information available. There will be some sort of hard copy as well. We're still working on the details of what that looks like. But for 900 objects, we're not going to be able to put all of the kind of content that you see up here into a hard copy version. And open storage is actually storage. This is where the Higgins collection is going to be stored. It is a working zone of the museum, and so we've run with that concept to really bring life and identity to the open storage experience. What happens in a museum? What goes on behind the doors that you're not allowed to go into? This is going to be an actual working space. One of the things I said at the outset is that one of the things I have to do as a curator, Bill McMillan, our conservator, has to do this sort of thing. Likewise, we go into storage, we pull objects off the shelves to put them down on a table and look at them. Maybe I'm taking snapshots for a scholar who wants to see a particular mark that might be on an object or the decoration that's on it. Maybe Bill needs to examine an object for its condition. It's being contemplated to be sent out on loan. We need to have that working space right there. So that table that you see is designed to accommodate the needs of the staff. You can see that there's stanchions there for crowd control when objects are, museum objects are actually on the table. But it's open. The idea is that people can, they can pester me with questions when I'm trying to do my work on that table. Anybody who has my job or Bill's job, now or in the future, needs to be somebody who really likes talking to the public, who loves sharing the collection the way both of us do. Visitors will really love this experience. I mean, we always get this whenever we're out in the gallery doing something. They're really interested to see what's going on and often really enjoy talking with us. I envision maybe, we're going to sort of document what's going on, maybe even have a little signage that says, there's going to be a visiting scholar here at 2 p.m. Come by if you want to kind of see some of the work happening. I really love what Bill did with this sort of whiteboard kind of cafe style write-up of like what he's working on, conveying the fact that this is not just an exhibition that we put out there and we set out there and we'll take it down eventually. This is the ongoing living work of the museum that you get to see in real time. And that big case in the center is going to have various kinds of activities that allow visitors to kind of take part in various ways or kind of have something of an experience of what it's like to be a curator or a conservator. Digital station there, we've already got a number of 3D models. These models are amazing. The level of detail is really spectacular. So visitors can't actually pick up the helmet of the Pembroke armor and move it around in their hands, but they can manipulate the 3D model. They can look at it. The light isn't really very friendly to it, but they can see the inside of it. Even I don't get to see the inside of the Pembroke armor helmet. We have a lot of potential with these 3D models. They also have the side benefit of allowing us to do 3D prints. You can see one example is already on display just off of the balcony of the Wren Court. The original ancient Egyptian axe is on display next to the 3D print. A great tactile experience, and of course has particular advantages for people with limited vision to experience the collection in the way that might not otherwise be possible. And also in that same space off of the Wren Court, we have this temporary installation where we're starting to develop behind-the-scenes videos. What's the kind of work that is involved in creating mounts, for example, for the collection? People tend to be really, really curious about all of that kind of behind-the-scenes work, and this is a great opportunity for us to let the public understand so much better what it takes to make a museum possible, and even to participate in it. Built into the open storage space, rotating display areas that allow us to do various kinds of pop-up installations, working with community organizations. The installation just off the Wren Court was done by a sort of a pilot project done by a team of interns who were working here. And I can see we're partnering with local colleges, for example, cultural organizations, maybe the India Society, finding people who might be interested in working with us to bring a community perspective and a community voice into the curation process. And of course, hands-on experiences. Visitors love to touch arms and armor, even when they're not supposed to. But of course they want to. These are objects that are meant to be touched. They're meant to be handled. They invite human contact. And so visitors really want to have the experience of what is it like to wear a helmet? What is it like to lift a sword? So we will definitely have those kinds of hands-on experiences. Again, tying in with that overall concept of what happens at a museum. Curation really does require hands-on contact with the objects. So this is another peek at one of the installations. This is the sort of development process. We're coming up with ideas of what kinds of helmets might be on that table, figuring out what they might cost, how durable they might be, how they might be tethered and mounted, and so on. Do we have mirrors so people can see themselves, or are their phones and selfies going to do the trick? That is still all TBD. But this is part of the process that allows various constituents. We have an interdepartmental group that meets every week to look at proposals like this to decide the direction. There will also be a family nook. Because of this particular collection's appeal to a broad audience, we really want it to be friendly to intergenerational families. And so we're going to create a particular space that's it's made to be especially friendly for families with younger children, still in development, but that will be a feature right by that window, which has been reopened after what decades is it? It's huge, it looks fantastic, and it really is going to help transform the space. I'm often asked this question. We will continue to have arms and armor in other galleries. That was always one of the big appeals of moving the Higgins collection here. When I was curating at the Higgins, I had all this arms and armor, but I didn't have other kinds of things. If I wanted to tell a story around the context of these objects, I had to use graphics, typically. Having armor in the same gallery with other kinds of works, paintings, they have a dialogue with each other. There's an interaction. It enlivens the visitor experience, enriches the story, both for the paintings and for the armor. So that's always been part of the plan. And as you can see on the numbers, by the numbers on screen, we expect to have upwards of 1,000 objects on display, all told, in all of these settings. And that's going to be something like twice what we actually had on display at the Higgins Armory. I'm really excited that we are able to achieve this. So that is my wrap-up. We've got all kinds of stuff going on digitally. If you want to check out our social media is one of the places where we are documenting the process, development process for the galleries. We've got a playlist on WAM's YouTube channel. Our 3D objects are accessible also on Sketchfab. And that installation that I referenced in the hallway off of the balcony of the Renaissance Court is another place where we're going to keep people informed and give people a glimpse of what's happening behind the closed doors as the gallery starts to take shape. And that is me amazingly kind of on time. I was a little worried about this because I don't like to speak from a script, but because you just end up but if you're not on a script, you can't quite be sure how it's going to play out. But we still even have, I think, time for questions.
You mentioned that open storage is going to be adaptable. Are you building it with expansion of the collection in mind, like 20% over time or something?
Yeah, so what I would say is the collection is not going to expand hugely in terms of total size. It's one of the reasons I said early on, the collection had pretty much taken its shape by the 1950s. We will tinker with things around the edges, but any one acquisition for the collection, it's going to run minimum of tens of thousands of dollars to acquire these kinds of objects. So we're not going to do this in quantity like Higgins was doing back in the 1920s, but we will be adding new objects. So the idea, part of that idea, both in the front gallery and the rear gallery, is that I wanted to create spaces as well as narratives that would be friendly to new kinds of objects coming into the mix. So for example, if we'd tried to tell a chronological story of arms and armor, that would have been a much more kind of rigid layout. Kind of hard to do in a round space anyway, but part of this kind of thematic approach, the sort of mythology of armor concept, makes it easier to trade objects in as new objects are acquired. And similarly, the flexibility of the open storage will allow things to get rearranged. The nature of open storage is that like shape objects kind of have to go together. So there are restrictions to what you can do. So like staff weapons, they're all going to be basically kind of in the same place, because in order to pack things tightly enough, you kind of have to group them in the first instance by general shape. But beyond that, we're going to try and create groupings or proximities that facilitate storytelling and ultimately can accommodate new additions into the collection. By and large, my guess is most additions into the collection will tend to go into the front gallery, because why buy something if it's not going to be a star object?
Does the collection contain flags, coats of arms, and that sort of thing?
Higgins did purchase flags and coats of arm type things, but they were really kind of wall dressing. You know, they were meant to, I mean, you can really see them in that photo on the left. You know, they were meant to sort of enhance the feel of the Great Hall, but they were never really kind of museum objects. They were really just there for ambiance.
Would that be one of the things that you're trying to acquire?
Well, actually, as it happens, one of our more recent acquisitions is a standard head from a Mughal banner. So this is an Indian 18th century banner head of a kind of a type most people would never have seen before. It's basically a big sort of fish head, catfish actually, with huge, ferocious looking teeth. Really, really spectacular looking object. You know, decorated with silver and gold and so on. It's about that deep, about that high, that wide. And then the back edge of it has little sort of holes and such that would have attached this huge long silk windsock. And so on the march, this thing would have been held up very often on the back of an elephant on this long staff, and this sort of ferocious, sort of semi-mythical fish creature is kind of fluttering in the wind. If it's something that's really a spectacular object, that would be, and this would be an example, that would be the kind of thing that we'd want to bring in. Yeah, sure.
This is my first time at this museum. This was great, thank you. Is this going to like put your museum on the map? Like it's going to be really famous and like a centerpiece of the museum?
You mean that particular object that I just mentioned, or the gallery? The gallery is going to be completely unique. I mean, our collection is not as big as the Met, so I mean, we're never going to be able to compete with that. But I think the fact that, among other things, we've taken such a very different approach to arms and armor, because essentially, if you go to the Met, go to Philadelphia, go to Chicago, go to Cleveland, any of the sort of major arms and armor collections, you pretty much see the same thing in all of those places. They're basically organized around the same kind of concept, differences around the edges, and the recentish reinstallation at Chicago was really spectacular. They did a fabulous job with it, but it's kind of in the tradition of, it's the sort of thing that's been done many times before. This has never been done, so I really do feel it will set us apart. Yeah.
Some of those places do have a more kinetic display of armor, and we don't seem to have that here. In motion, on the animals.
Right. Yeah.
Are you going to do that through animation or?
Yeah. We're certainly going to. We'll be using things like digital technology to show the objects in motion. We have a challenge in terms of like a figure on horseback. We don't really have much in the way of horse armor. It's not impossible that we could do such an installation. When I started this project, it was impossible because we had the Paul Revere statue in the one place that maybe an equestrian armor could have been installed, and I was told it was basically immovable. It's moved since, so maybe that at some point becomes a place for an equestrian sort of figure on horseback, but it would be just like an armored figure on an unarmored horse, or largely unarmored, because we just don't really have that. Oh, Mark, you are just trying to press my PTSD here.
So when you showed the picture of the original armory, it looked like sort of when you walked in there was a horse in armor. Was that not actually? Is that like a replica?
So by and large, what we did at the Higgins to get that effect was to cover the horse in cloth, which is a strategy that we could use. But it's not real. Yeah, it's not quite the same thing as the Met has these amazing armored figures on armored horses. Philadelphia acquired fairly recently a kind of armored suit of armor for man and horse that looks spectacular. It also cost a mint, as you can imagine. But maybe that's something that could be in the future for this collection. And that I think that once this project is completed, I think one of the main things that needs to be done for the Higgins collection and for the installations is collection development. I haven't been able to focus on it because if you're going to spend this kind of money, you really need to spend some time doing research. And the gallery project's kind of taken up all the time I have available. Yeah.
Well, I really love the three knights at the beginning and the different cultures, and I think with the chainmail now, seeing that it's going to be chainmail makes it make more sense of what is that. But I did have a question about if you had considered putting one of the Japanese armors in that group, because I remember Higgins has a red, and yeah.
Yeah. So the Japanese armor is it's sort of the bane of my existence. Our Japanese armor, I mean, we have some good objects, but Japanese armor is constructed of lacquered plates of iron held together with silk lace. Lacquer and silk are two things that do not like light. You can kind of maybe see in the photograph there that back in the day, the windows at the Higgins Armory, those were not covered over as they were in the later. So most of the Japanese armor in the Higgins collection is in really bad condition. I don't even want to look at it because I feel the rays from my eyeballs are causing it to disintegrate even further. So it would be, but this would be another, and the upshot of all of this is that you can't have Japanese armor on permanent display. What you can do is you can cycle through suits of armor, so kind of the way you would with prints, drawings, photographs. We don't have the depth in the collection to sustain a cycle. When we open the new gallery, we will have a suit of Japanese armor on display. It won't be in that front area because it's so sensitive it can't be left out for people's hair and stuff to float around and waft onto. It's going to have to be in a case, and eventually it will have to come out. But this is another area in which collection development will become really important. Japanese armors are acquirable. Really good European armor from the Renaissance, not so much. But Japanese armor is still to be had, and I think that is ought to be a high priority for collecting over once the gallery project is completed. Yeah.
Is the jousting armor going to stay in place in the medieval gallery?
Yes. Yes. So that armor is there in particular because it's the one suit of armor we have that you can kind of present as a medieval suit. Parts of it do date, post-date 1500, but actually most of it is pre-1500. So it actually works as a medieval suit in the medieval gallery, and so that will be staying there.
So doing tours, especially with school kids, it's very popular.
Yeah.
And actually, the open storage, the drawers, those are very popular.
Yes, they are. Yeah, we will have drawers. You may have seen glimpses of them. People love the drawers. It's kind of funny that it's just like all it is just like you've got drawers at home. It's the same object that could have been out in a but there's something experiential, and there's a sense of sort of discovery.
Yeah. It's a secret.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I still remember being a kid, and what I know that if it were me, and I was 8 years old or something, I would open the drawer, I'd look for something really exciting, and I'd drag my parents over to see it. And that sense of discovery is really, I think, genuinely important. Yeah.
Did any other museums try to acquire the collection and spirit it away from this?
There are, there were negotiations with the MFA at one point. But there have never, I think there are, there are museums that would love to cherry pick this collection. They would, but I mean, they're not that they would deliberately undermine us to see us go under in order to have acquired these objects. But so I would say by and large that has not been the case. We have had private collectors also sometimes try to acquire objects from our collection, but that's not allowed. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, you mentioned about the sort of Eurocentric nature of the collection, and maybe collections in general. And I'm wondering what sort of gaps you see in the collection that you'd like to fill.
Yeah, so for example, I'd love to have objects from Southeast Asia for a bunch of reasons. I mean, we've got a large Vietnamese population in Worcester. It'd be nice to have, we have nothing from Vietnam. And there's great arms and armor from Vietnam. And in general, there's some really, from that section, from Southeast Asia, there is good arms and armor. There's good arms and armor to be had on the market. So that would be one of the sorts of places I'd really like. More tricky is the Western Hemisphere. I mean, I'd love to have things, Native American or pre-Columbian from Central or South America. We have a little bit, very, very little bit. But, those, it'd be kind of nice to have objects, that on display from those regions. But it can be tricky. So again, this is something that I think should be on the agenda after the gallery opens, but it's not going to be something that you can just go out on the market, find something and buy it. It's going to, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Kind of bouncing off of that, when you were discussing your strategic goals, number 4, build audiences and new demographics. I was very pleased to see your plans for the front gallery and having a different cultural aspect to it. I was wondering if you had any ideas, and I know this is a multi-departmental thing, but any ideas of how to do that outreach to meet the rich cultural environment of Worcester?
That is one of the reasons I built community curation into the plan, because I figured, it makes a difference if you've got something that you're actually going to do. I mean, just going out and hi, how are you? That doesn't necessarily result in something. That's not necessarily going to build deep connections. But with a community curation program, we could really use that as an anchor point to start interacting more deeply with various aspects of the local community in a kind of focused way that's got real outcomes that will bring people into the museum and make people feel like they have a place here and a role here that might not have been so evident before. Yeah.
Speaking of community aspect, when you said pop-up shows, are you thinking like activations by like contemporary artists in the space?
Yeah, I mean the idea with the temporary areas in open storage is that they would be done in a way that's kind of easier to do with not so much money and not so much lead time. Typically for a proper temporary exhibition, it's an expensive undertaking that requires just a lot of people to work for a long time to make it happen. I'd like to be able to do things that are kind of easier, more responsive, more more rapidly changing than our temporary exhibitions would. So collaborations with kind of contemporary artists of various sorts. Maybe an example that springs to mind is they just did that blade making exhibition at the Worcester Center for Crafts. And some of those objects were really cool. And I would love to put them on display in the Arms and Armor Gallery. It's showing people that these are living crafts that are being practiced by people today in a lot of really creative ways, as well as building those kind of connections in the community, giving a forum to local artists and craftsmen, visibility, and again, that pop-up concept makes it just so much easier to make that happen. So I think we're ready to wrap up, but I'm happy to, if you want to chat, feel free to color me before I escape from the room. I'm not going to rush for the exit or anything. But thanks tremendously for sharing this with me today. It's been really lovely.